Drummond, Bulldog Drummond, and he's our man of action for this week's movie. Hello and welcome to a new episode of B-Movie Enema, the series. I'm B-Movie proctologist Jeff Arbuckle. With me over there is my girl Friday, Nurse Disembodied. Nurse, how you doing today?
I wish I had a super cool name.
Well, what do you mean?
Who names someone Cartoon Face Disembodied? Seriously, neither the first name or the last name is something anyone has. One sounds like a nickname and a bad one, and one sounds like a dumb pun and a really bad one at that. It's like whoever birthed me into existence just plainly sucks at naming people. I want to be something like Countess Tezera, or, I don't know, Duchess Delilah. Ooh, I like that one. Call me Duchess Delilah.
Sure, whatever you say, Your Highness. Anyway, this week we've got the last film to be made to feature the character Hugh Bulldog Drummond. Some girls do. Now, gosh, there's a lot for me to talk about here, but let's start with the history of the character. Bulldog Drummond was created by novelist H.C. McNeill under his pen name Sapper. McNeill was a British soldier during World War I, and his works between 1915 and 1918 were mostly about his time in the war. After the war, his books were largely written to be thrillers. He was given the pen name Sapper by Lord Northcliffe, who owned the Daily Mail, who published his stories. Now, why was he given that pen name? Well, first and foremost, at the time that he started writing for the Daily Mail, he was still a serving British officer, so no serving officers were allowed to publish under their real names. Second, he was part of the Royal Engineers, and Sapper came from a nickname in that corps. Now, McNeill sold fairly well. However, his Bulldog Drummond books, the first being published in 1920, was by far his most enduring legacy. Sapper would be credited with 10 Drummond books between 1920 until his death in 1937 from throat cancer. The man he supposedly based Drummond on, Gerard Fairley, ended up picking up the banner from there and published 7 more books between 1938 and 1954. Sapper was diagnosed with cancer while working with Fairley on a Bulldog Drummond play, so Fairley was already part of the creative process with the character. Between 1922 and 1951, 22 Bulldog Drummond movies were produced. Considering years like 1937 through 1939, where 9 movies were released in that time frame, think of these movies as B-pulp pictures released similarly to that era's Sherlock Holmes series with Basil Rathbone. Now, the movies and novels were quite popular, right? Well, it shouldn't be all that surprising that Sapper would influence Ian Fleming and one of the most popular and enduring characters of all time, James Bond.
So, what, is Bulldog Drummond like an international spy and a man of action?
Well, sort of half that, I guess. Like Sapper, Drummond was a World War I vet. Now, I'm assuming that he had some standing or money or something because he got pretty bored with his life, so he put an ad out in the paper in search of excitement, and then Drummond became a gentleman adventurer.
Now that's the life I'm talking about.
Yeah, think about how awesome it would be, Nurse. We'd go jet-setting here, there, and everywhere, sipping martinis beside the pool in Monaco one day, and escaping bad guys in Berlin the next.
I kind of think we'd be more successful if we did the adventuring separately. You know, like, I'll be at the pool in Monaco, seducing the big bad guy, and you're, I don't know, like, breaking into a secret underground lab in northern Alaska.
Well, why am I in Alaska in the underground lab in the tundra, and you're in Monaco by the pool, probably getting day drunk on martinis to the point that you pass out and get sunburned? Actually, you know what? That's kind of funny. I'll deal with the Alaskan lab. Good luck with your hangover in Monaco.
Joke's on you. I'm still in Monaco by the pool. The life of Duchess Delilah is so difficult.
Yeah, unlike James Bond, at least the Bond we know in cinema, Drummond was a large, unattractive character. He's described as about 6 foot tall, 200-pound guy who was kind of brainless. I feel like if he was created 100 years later, he'd be like one of those Paul brothers doing boneheaded stunts on YouTube. Now, one thing that was most definitely a part of the character's personality was that he was almost aggressively patriotic to the United Kingdom. That would ultimately create some troubling comparisons uncovered by scholars after Sapper's death. Now, you see, Sapper wrote the character as kind of a fascist. He was kind of portrayed to supposedly keep up the status quo of Britain, but would also often come across as being, as academic Hans Burtons would put it, a murderous exponent of a fierce competitive individualism. Contemporaries of Sapper's, like Cecil Day Lewis, who created the detective Nigel Strangeways, thought of Drummond as not much more than just a schoolyard bully. Drummond was basically a xenophobic chauvinist. So after Sapper passed away, his works were started to be seen through the lens of the recently ended Second World War. It was becoming pretty clear that McNeill was a fan of one of the more fundamental elements of fascism. The head of state's word is above law. Now, granted, this is something that's hard to exactly prove, especially since people were particularly sensitive at the time based on current events, but he had a style similar to others of his time to inevitably include anti-Semitism and xenophobia, only McNeill typically used much less polite language than those contemporaries of his. McNeill, through his Bulldog Drummond books, was often seen as a conservative who just thought the way a lot of his countrymen felt too. So, I don't know, take that for what it's worth.
I'm not so sure I want to watch this movie after all that stuff you said about anti-Semitism, chauvinism, and fascism.
Well, here's the thing, nurse.
Duchess.
Yeah, whatever. This movie is more of a James Bond parody than anything that would really be that close to the original depiction of Drummond. Some Girls Do was the second of 2 films starring Richard Johnson. We'll talk more about him in the next segment, but this Drummond is more of a happy-go-lucky James Bond on an adventure trying to solve some bad guy stuff. So it's a little more of a product of that era than its post-World War I British fascism.
Duchess Delilah will be the judge of that.
Okie dokie. Well, let's get this movie started and find out what Some Girls Do.
Actually, I'm beginning to think I want to be called Baroness Helga. Helga is a nice, strong name. By royal decree, you shall now refer to your Duchess Delilah as Baroness Helga. And you shall be my royal Jester Flicky. You may continue your program now, Flicky.
Alright, well, Some Girls Do is the last movie to be made based on the Bulldog Drummond character, and it's very easy to see this was heavily influenced by Eon Productions' James Bond series that had, up until 1969, when Some Girls Do was released, starred Sean Connery. Now, we're going to come back around to Sean Connery, James Bond, and this film star Richard Johnson in a bit. But this was the follow-up to Deadlier Than the Male, which was made in 1967 and also starred Johnson. Both of these films were directed by Ralph Thomas. Thomas was a bit of a journeyman director. He didn't really do a lot of big-time movies, but he did get a lot of leverage with producer Sidney Box when they made the movie Doctor in the House starring Dirk Bogarde. Now, this turned into a 7-movie series that was quite popular in Britain. All of the films in the series were directed by Thomas and produced by Box. Now, there are quite a few recognizable faces in this movie, and almost all of them appear in this first segment. At the beginning, one of the girls going around bumping off these important airplane folks is Joanna Lumley. Lumley would be best known to most people these days as one of the stars of the breakout British comedy Absolutely Fabulous. Along with Lumley in these early scenes was Jutta Stensgaard. Stensgaard was also in the British sci-fi sex comedy film Zeta 1, as well as a couple of the Carry On films that were pretty popular in England, with the first of those films starring the original Doctor Who, William Hartnell. Stinsgard would appear in one of the Doctor films that Thomas made, and in 1971 Stinsgard appeared as Carmilla in Lust for a Vampire for Hammer. Speaking of Doctor Who, in 1970 she auditioned for the role of Jo Grant, companion of the third Doctor, and who was played by John Pertwee. Now, speaking of Doctor Who, later, in a relatively unremarkable scene as an airplane company man, Richard Hurndall appears in this movie. Hurndall was hired in 1983 to appear as the first Doctor in the 20th anniversary special episode, The Five Doctors. Hurndall was brought in because the original first Doctor, Hartnell, died in 1975. So we should all recognize the actress playing Flicky.
Haha, Flicky.
She's played by Sydney Rome. Now, Rome, of course, was last seen in The Puma Man. Now, get this. Rome was only 17 years old when this movie was being made. In fact, she had not even turned 18 by the time this movie was released. I almost have to believe that maybe she lied about her 1951 birth year, but what do I know?
I mean, she is kind of looking young, but I wouldn't think she was only 17 years old in this.
Yeah, no doubt.
I kind of hate how she and some of the other girls have that high-pitched, bubbly, bimbo-y voice. It's annoying.
Yeah, I can see that. I don't know if it's just how the girls talked, or if it was, if that's the energy they brought, or if it's more of a kind of comedic chauvinism that's present in Drummond's character. Either which way, Flicky wants to be an adventurer with Drummond, and she suspiciously shows up wherever he is. Now, that's one thing I do kind of like about some of the ladies in this movie. They definitely have some endearing qualities to their characters. Rome is flirty and fun and seems up for the challenge of chasing Drummond around the globe or wherever he's going. And we'll talk a little bit more about number 7 later because she's kind of adorable. Now, one more person of note in this first segment is Robert Morley. Morley's debut in film was way back in 1935, Scrooged, as an uncredited rich man. And he then appeared as King Louis XVI in Marie Antoinette, and he was just in a ton of movies. He's one of those guys who is really recognizable, but there are actually few movies that I recognize on his filmography. The Great Muppet Caper, Oh Heavenly Dog, and 1974's Great Expectations are probably the only ones of his that I've likely seen, but his burly stature and bushy eyebrows is incredibly notable and recognizable. And I do like that he's playing a character named Miss Mary.
Why was he named that?
I don't know, why are you calling yourself Baroness Helga? Anyway, oh yeah, Helga. She's played by Dahlia Lavi. Now, Lavi played in a handful of movies and was even in another James Bond parody, 1967's Casino Royale. When she was only 10 years old, she met Kirk Douglas, who was in Israel making his movie The Juggler. She said that she wanted to become a dancer, so he helped her convince her parents to send her to Sweden to study ballet. But I guess she didn't really like the cold and gave up dancing to become a model. And she ultimately got spotted on a beach and was cast in a movie starring none other than Kirk Douglas. Now, I mentioned Joanna Lumley earlier, and since we're circling the drain quite a bit with this James Bond stuff, she and another actress in this movie, Virginia North, appeared in both Some Girls Do and the next James Bond adventure, On Her Majesty's Secret Service. And they were both being filmed at Pinewood Studios at the same time, so the two girls made it into both. All right, Baroness, are you ready to get back to the movie?
I believe I am, Flicky.
I'm beginning to hope that you put a plastic explosive in my phone receiver.
How come?
I mean, that would be far better than being called Flicky for the rest of this episode.
I simply cannot believe Flicky is a turncoat. Oh my, what a surprise. Am I right?
As much as it would be nice for Sydney Rome to follow me around the world, it is pretty suspicious that she showed up everywhere Drummond was. Alright, so Hugh Bulldog Drummond has been played by 14 different actors across the 24 featured films starring the character. Carlisle Blackwell was the first actor in 1922 to play the part. However, it wasn't until 1929's Bulldog Drummond that was the first time the character could be heard on screen, and it was Ronald Colman who played the character in the first talkie version of Drummond. Coleman came back in 1934 to play the part again in Bulldog Drummond Strikes Back. Interestingly, also in 1934, long-time British actor Ralph Richardson also played Drummond in The Return of Bulldog Drummond, and that had to be kind of confusing to know which one you went and saw and who starred in which one with titles like that. American actor John Howard would be the one most closely associated with the role, appearing in 7 Paramount B movies with the character between 1937 and 1939. In 1947, Ron Randall took over the role for 2 films for Columbia, followed by Tom Conway in 1948 for 2 more movies from 20th Century Fox. In 1951, Walter Pidgeon appeared in the only film made for MGM. In the wake of the James Bond boom in the 60s, the Rank organization from England got their 2-picture deal for Richard Johnson to appear in these light Bondian adventures. Now, Johnson was the original choice of director Terence Young to star as James Bond in 1962's Dr. No. However, Johnson was not available due to being an MGM contract player. Now, while MGM has long been associated with the Bond series, they were only the distributors with United Artists. Eon Productions were the actual producers of the movies. So I still have lots to say about James Bond. Are you excited for that, Baroness Helga?
So.
Alright, well, let's talk about Richard Johnson instead. Cool?
Are you going to mention that his name is basically Dick Johnson?
I don't have to now. But anyway, Johnson worked from 1951 right up until his death in 2015. He was ruggedly good looking and wasn't just known for acting. He also worked as a teacher of younger actors. He taught at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art during the summers and toured American colleges. He helped form the production company United British Artists in the early 80s, and he even served as a council member of the British Academy of Film and Television Arts, also known as BAFTA, which is kind of like the British version of our academy here. He was a pretty well-respected actor. His filmography is loaded with recognizable films and TV appearances. In 1963, he was in the original version of The Haunting. In 1968, he appeared in a big-name, big-budget version of Oedipus the King, co-starring with the likes of Christopher Plummer and Orson Welles. In 1970, he was in Julius Caesar with Charlton Heston, John Gielgud, and Jason Robards. That movie I saw in middle school as we studied the story by Shakespeare. And in the 70s, he appeared in 2 movies I covered at the B-Movie Enema blog, 1974's Beyond the Door and Lucio Fulci's 1979 masterpiece, Zombie. In Zombie, Johnson played Dr. Menard. He's studying the zombie infection that is breaking out on this Caribbean island. In fact, at the very beginning of the movie, we see a man shoot something in the face, and that's Johnson with the gun. He later discovers that it's a voodoo curse that he has to try to stop that's bringing the dead back. Johnson was extremely well liked by his co-star and fellow Brit, Ian McCullough, who said that the movie, quote, didn't have the greatest of scripts, but Richard gave every scene authority and color. In the sequence in which he was driving me in a Land Rover, he extemporized in such a lyrical and poetic fashion that it reminded me of my days with the Royal Shakespeare Company, unquote. So once the 80s came around, things did slow down for a bit for him as he took on other responsibilities, but he appeared in 1981's The Monster Club as a vampire being hunted by Donald Pleasance.
Cobras from the Puma Man?
The very same. On TV, Johnson appeared in episodes of Tales of the Unexpected, Midsummer Murders, Magnum P.I., Tales from the Dark Side, Thriller, and the Alfred Hitchcock Hour. He also appeared in the TV movie Spy Maker, The Secret Life of Ian Fleming, which starred Jason Connery, son of Sean Connery.
Another mention of James Bond. I guess that means we have to talk about Bond, huh?
Yes, we'll talk about that after we check out this exciting and twist-filled conclusion to Some Girls Do. And there we have it. Bulldog Drummond saves the world.
But did he? Did he save the whole world?
You know, now that you say it like that, I'm not sure.
Something to think about, huh?
It really is. It's kind of funny that Drummond mostly saves a supersonic jet from being blown up. That's about it. More than anything, I guess he mostly saved the interest of some company.
What a hero!
I guess. Anyway, James Villiers is playing Carl Peterson in this movie. Now, Peterson was a recurring villain in the earliest books starring Drummond. In this, he's portrayed as a criminal mastermind and keeps his master of disguise skills from the novels, and apparently he's a whiz with robotics, too.
I don't get it. Was number 7 a robot or not?
I mean, your guess is as good as mine on that front. I'm thinking that she probably was meant to be a robot, but that was either changed at the last minute or just supposed to be a big old gag or something, I don't know. She was kind of adorably likable, though. If she was a robot, she's defective. If she's a real girl, then I guess she just wanted to belong someplace. But number 7 was played by Vanessa Howard, who had a short career in movies with a few fairly high-profile roles, with the TV movie The Picture of Dorian Gray, and as the titular girlie. She died somewhat young from complications from COPD, so get checked if you have issues breathing or coughing, kiddos. But Villiers also died in his 60s, passing away from cancer in 1998. Now, Nurse, I am going to give you your time to shine with your final grade of Some Girls Do, but I've got to talk about James Bond real quick. Now, I really do like Some Girls Do as well. It's more a palatable Bond parody than the actual real James Bond parody that was 1967's Casino Royale. This one is a fun little treat when it comes down to being an action movie that's fun, stays kind of flirty, and doesn't really take itself too seriously. It is most definitely a product of its time. The 60s were a huge era for the gentleman action star. Of course, that's thanks to Sean Connery's rough and rugged portrayal of James Bond, Agent 007 for the British Secret Service, but he could also still clean up nicely in a tux. But the Bond movies made so much money and were so popular, particularly with teenage and early 20s guys, that just about everyone wanted to get in on the action. It's interesting that we watched Some Girls Do in 2022, the 100th anniversary of the first Bulldog Drummond movie, because this is also the 60th anniversary of Dr. No being released in the UK. I grew up on Bond. It was one of those things that was still quite popular in the 80s when I was little because, of course, of Roger Moore's run as the secret agent who takes his martinis shaken, not stirred. The movie's got a lot of play on TV too, particularly in the summers on the ABC Movie of the Week. I remember taping them off TV, then later hunting down the uncut versions at the video store. In 1989, I went to see License to Kill starring Timothy Dalton as Bond, and I became more obsessed with the series than ever before. I took that as an opportunity to start collecting the movies on VHS in the early 90s while still desperately waiting for the next Bond film that wouldn't come until 1995's GoldenEye. The Bond movies are something that I still go to the theater to see with my dad with every new one that's released. We talk about our favorite memories of going to see them. He knows how much I love the series, and I know that his favorite is and forever will be From Russia with Love. It's kind of funny that you can very, very easily label these movies as chauvinist because Bond is kind of that classic white guy hero who scores with all the girls, even sometimes manhandling them into submission, but they do oddly cross over. There are a lot of female Bond fans. They are escapist fun, and yes, there's a lot of wish fulfillment for guys, but Bond also tends to mirror his times. You get the impression that he really is kind of the best a guy can be when it comes to being the type of person who might have to do a lot of living in the gray areas, if you catch my drift. One of the great things about the Bond series is that it really doesn't take itself too seriously either. The movies have stakes, but they each have moments that are fun. Sure, maybe the Daniel Craig era has become a little bit more serious, and that can be something that can ruffle some feathers, but there's so many fun, and exciting moments that always bring a smile to my face. Alright, nurse, tell the folks at home what you award some girls do.
So you're just not gonna call me Duchess Delilah or Baroness Helga anymore?
I mean, did you still want me to do that?
I don't know. It was kind of fun, but I don't want to have to develop an accent.
But why would you have to?
Well, I don't know any Helgas or Delilahs that don't have an accent.
Fair enough, I guess.
Anyway, so yes, obviously I think Baroness Helga is an awesome name, and I want to make Helga a popular name again. I think we need to get someone on that. But I do dislike how many of the girls have those mousy bimbo voices. I guess it's to make them seem, I don't know, unassuming, but they just kind of grate on my nerves a little bit. I also think all the girls' helmet hairdos are really funny. That nest of hair just sits up there and refuses to move no matter how much it really should. Do I look like I would have that problem? Do I? Huh? The fight scenes are kinda hokey, but maybe that was just the era. Maybe they didn't have any real stuntmen on set to help people look like they were actually getting hit and throwing a real punch. I probably should check out one of the Bond movies from the late 60s and see how some of those fight scenes look, but I suspect they're a little bit better. And maybe Jeff's right, and they aren't taking themselves all that serious, so the fight scenes come out looking like these. However, this is really a pretty good looking movie. They clearly had some sort of budget on this. There's a legitimate big orchestra score throughout the movie that really worked with the action scenes. The sets looked really cool, especially the bad guys' headquarters. The costumes also looked pretty top-notch. Maybe it couldn't quite compete with a James Bond movie, but this movie looks like it cost quite a few bucks. In all, this is an exciting little action movie with some kick-ass babes and some fun moments in it. I give this movie 4 poops out of 5. Now, I gotta go save a supersonic, super cool jet plane from getting blown up. Jeff, back to you.
Wait, what was that last part? Nurse? Nurse? Baroness Helga? Duchess Delilah? Oh god, if she's still in the driveway like last week, I will really have lots to answer for. Nurse, oh, thank god. Wait, are you okay?
Maybe?
What was that about saving a supersonic jet?
Oh yeah, that, yeah, I sure did say that, didn't I?
So, did you save it?
Nope.